Joining me now to talk more about this, Sean Spicer, Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. Sean, it's good to have you here, and as we talk about that enthusiasm, it has certainly turned the tide, maybe in the GOP's favor following that first debate, but Team Obama does have a proven and an active ground game. An example of this is in the state of Ohio, where the Obama campaign has 120 field offices. Governor Romney's campaign has 35. So how does your party plan to catch up? And we know that Mitt Romney is in the state of Ohio continuing his push there today.
Well, good morning, Thomas. It's great to be with you again. I think very simply, and this sounds very rudimentary, but offices can't contact people. People do. And when you look at just last weekend alone, we had 30,000 volunteers in the battleground states making 2.5 million voter contacts. We have a robust absentee ballot and early vote program. We had our ground game in place in March of this year, which is months before when it had ever been done before. The metrics that we have in terms of total volunteer contacts are now exceeding 35 million that we've made in the battleground states. And so, again, I think what you hear from the Obama campaign is they like to tout the number of offices that they open. So they open an office. But, again, that's not activity and that's not results. At the end of the day, the question is, do you get your people out to the polls to vote for you? And we continue to identify more people, to have surges of volunteers come in, to have record number of absentee ballot requests in key states. So I think that when the proof is actually in a lot of those deliverables that they don't want to talk about, and that's where I think we're going to excel and catapult this race to victory.
Sean, you say it's this robust early voter plan that you have, and just to remind everybody, yesterday being the voter registration deadline in dozens of states, including the battlegrounds of Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania. Virginia's deadline is on Monday. Early voting already underway in 35 different states. Did Republicans too much stock in voter suppression issues and not enough in the ground game? As you say, even though it is not about all the offices, but a lot of efforts were done to try to suppress the vote in different states, and with all these Republican-led state houses trying to change the laws. Was there too much emphasis put on that?
Well, first of all, I actually find it extremely insulting to say that there was any effort by anyone to suppress the vote. I find that unbevelievably insulting, and
would you say that to the federal panel that ruled against Texas's law, Sean? Sean, would you say that to the federal panel who said that it puts an unfair burden against the poor, basically allotting it to a poll tax? They said that this was basically a poll tax, and it would be voter suppression in the state of Texas, and it won't be happening there, just like they're now utilizing in other states.
Okay, so in the state of Rhode Island, which I think my home state, which is pretty controlled by the Democratic Party, there didn't seem to be too much outrage there when they did it. I think when you look at every poll that's ever come out, 70 to 80% of Americans support this. So I think to somehow equate showing a photo ID, which in most states is given free if there is an issue with the person's economic condition, then somehow requiring people to show the same type of thing that they would be required to get government assistance, get on an airplane, enter a government building, is actually a common sense move to ensure that we maintain the integrity of our precious right to vote.
But your basic American right is not to fly, is it, Sean? Your basic American right isn't to fly, is it?
No, but I don't understand your question, because
your basic American right,
when there are certain things that you want to protect, I don't understand how. But entering a government building, getting government benefits, things like that, it's a pretty common sense thing to say, hey, if you're going to come into a voting booth to claim that you are somebody, we'd like to actually use a common sense measure to ensure that you are that person.
To get an ID like that in certain cases, it is considered to be a poll tax, and a poll tax is unconstitutional. Is a poll tax constitutional or unconstitutional?
A poll tax would be, but I don't understand. I mean, that's like saying to drive on a road is a poll tax because you have to get a license. To enter a government building, there's a poll tax because you have to enter, you have to show a photo ID. To get government benefits, there's a poll tax because you have to show ID to get those benefits. So if that's your standard, A, it's against 70 to 80% of everyone else in this country.
A poll tax only deals when you're going to the polls.
Trying to maintain.
A poll tax only deals when you're going. A poll tax really only deals when you're going to the polls to vote.
I know what a poll tax is, Thomas.
So driving on a road and and getting a license, that's not a poll tax. Going into a government building is not a poll tax. Flying on an airplane and showing your passport is not a poll tax. But going to vote and having to prove who you are, but having to go out and spend money on getting that ID, or driving 30 miles because you don't have an ID place in your town, and so you got to drive a disproportionate distance to get one, that is a poll tax. That costs you money.
Well, as far as I'm aware, every state that's implemented photo ID has ensured that anyone who can't afford it is given one free of charge. So I'm not sure how you can then equate a tax. Second, I don't understand. I mean, what you just said to me is, gosh, you know, to prove who you are, to have to vote is a tax. What would you do? Just assume that you walk in and anyone could just say, hey, I'm who you are. I am who I am. There is a degree to which you
we don't have an issue of voter fraud in this country. It really wasn't us that came up with this. It was basically our forefathers and the elected leaders who put together our Constitution that decided that, not me.
Okay, at a time when it was a little different back then. I don't believe they had driver's licenses back in the 1700s, but I'll check on that. I don't understand why it would be, when you have a common sense measure that says, hey, if you're going to walk into a voting booth, to ensure that your vote not only counts for you, but someone else doesn't come in and dilute that vote by casting a ballot that they are not who they say they are.
There's no instances of voter fraud. There are no substantial instances of voter fraud that federal judges would actually rule on to implement these laws. I mean, they have these cases that have been unproven going up the federal chain.
Do you lock your house at night?
Do I lock my house at night?
Do you lock the doors to your house at night?
Yeah.
Okay. You do it not because it maybe has a history of being broken into, but because you regard your property and your personal well-being as something precious and you want to protect it. It's not because there's a history of necessarily your home being broken into. And so I think the question comes down, when it comes to protecting our right to vote, it's not necessarily has there been rampant voting fraud in every state that we have to protect it. It says this is a precious right that each of us has as an American.
Why do we need to lock down the vote?
And there's a common sense measure put in place to ensure that nothing happens to that.
I mean, that's what basically voter suppression is, putting a lock on the right and the access for many Americans to vote who may not have the same access to voting as maybe you and I have, because we can afford to go get an ID for ourselves. And I know we're getting wrapped around the axis on this.
Right, but I mean, here's my if every state that's implemented this has allowed for measures to ensure that if you cannot afford it, that one is provided for you free, then your argument goes out the window.
But then why aren't these cases being won on the federal level in courts, Sean? I mean, we can have this discussion right here, but why isn't that argument being utilized?
What a lot of them have come to, and in fact, Pennsylvania last week said it wasn't a question of whether or not it was constitutional or not. They questioned whether there was enough time after they'd adjudicated it between then and the election, and then it could go forward, but they didn't believe there was enough time now that it was settled to allow people to do it. So the question is, it's not a question. It actually has been held by the Supreme Court.
It's not a presidential election next year, so it's not going to come back up next year.
Yes, no. What they said is you can't enforce that piece of it, because there's an election coming right up. We've taken so long to adjudicate this, so we don't have a problem with the issue. We have a problem with the timing. So you can move forward after this election when there'll be plenty of time before the next election. That being said, the Supreme Court has been very clear on this, very clear that it is completely upheld and it is constitutional. So aside from it being common sense, supported by 70–80% of America, it is constitutional.
We shall see how it goes with people getting out to the polls this year. Again, early voting already underway in 35 states. Sean Spicer from the RNC.
Just one last note, Thomas.
Yeah.
We would love to see more and more people vote. We think this election is about two visions of America, and we'd like to have as many people come out and vote.
But you'd like to see more people vote by imposing more red tape and getting more people. I mean, the Republican Party is about less taxes and about less red tape. But you would rather have people pay for an ID and have to go through jumping hoops to get to a polling station, correct?
I think we've cleared this up. There's no charge, so there's nothing to pay, and it protects not only my right to vote, your right to vote, but it ensures that no one else's is diluted. So I think every eligible voter, I encourage them to come out and vote, and I hope they vote for Governor Romney and Paul Ryan.
The RNC, Sean Spicer. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.